Hello again, I'm Matthew from thewetpen.com, and if you've seen my recent videos about Cosmo Air snow paper or Ayush paper, you'll know that I am constantly engaged in a search for the perfect fountain pen friendly paper, like a lot of you are, I'm sure. Well, I just got very lucky and I get to try out something brand new today. This box just arrived in the mail from India, and it's from Endless Stationery, the makers of the popular Endless Recorder notebooks. Let me show you what's inside. There's a note to me, but then we have a notebook that will look familiar to a lot of you. This is an Endless Recorder. And below this, we have something called a creative block, which is a nice little multi-purpose desktop notepad. I actually already own an Endless Recorder notebook, which is filled with 68 GSM Tomoe River paper. These are not filled with Tomoe River paper, though. Both of these are filled with Regalia paper, which, according to their website, Endless Stationery developed as their own proprietary paper. It's an acid-free 80 GSM paper that's made in India. At 80 GSM, it's a little heavier than Tomoe River 68 GSM, but exactly the same as Rhodia paper and similar to the 83 GSM paper in Cosmo Air Light notebooks, so not heavy in absolute terms. So with a new paper that I don't know anything about, I'm going to do a quick writing test to tell you how it feels, and I'll test it for sheening and shading and all that stuff. And then I'll use my worst inks on it to test for feathering and bleed through. But first, some basics about the notebook. As you can see, there's a blue cover strap with the black cover, and then inside, there's a black bookmark, and then a blue one to match the cover strap, which is a nice little design touch, I think. The pages are ruled at a distance of 7 millimeters, which is what I prefer, and they're all numbered at the bottom outside corner. At the front of the notebook, there's a blank leaf and then a table of contents section that covers 2 pages. Then we get another blank leaf so that the first numbered page starts on the right, and the final numbered page is 187. And finally, at the back of the notebook, there's a cardstock pocket, and the accordion sides of the pocket are not just paper. They seem to be made of, I can't tell if this is cloth or some sort of flexible synthetic. Whatever it is, it feels like it would hold up better than paper. The paper inside the notebook is a nice clean white, very similar to this Cosmo Air Snow, and not as warm as this Cosmo Air Light or this Midori. Okay, on to the writing tests. Before I get too deep into this thing, you really have to be a pretty hardcore stationery nerd to be able to stomach a video like this one, so before you drop off this thing, I hope you'll take a moment to give this video a like if this is the kind of thing that you're generally interested in. It's a huge help for small channels like mine. Okay, anyway. I'm going to start by writing on it with a fine nib in my Piniter Avatar UR, which I believe is a Yovo nib, and then I'll try a Pen BBS fine nib too. Oh, this is interesting. First of all, even with a fine nib, it's really nice and smooth. And there's a little bit of drag like you'd get on Cosmo Air Light. In fact, it feels a lot like Cosmo, with this surface that gives you really good contact with the nib. It's maybe not quite as pronounced as Cosmo, I'm not sure, I'll have to try it a bit more, but I really like it. I'm a big fan of Cosmo though, and not everyone is. Just to test how much ghosting there is with this paper, I've written some text with a dark black ink and a dark brown. And when I turn the page over and look at the back, Of course, you can tell that it's there, but the writing on the other side is so light that it is not distracting at all. Okay, Up next, let's see how this paper sheens. First, I'll just swab a couple of medium shading inks onto it, and we'll see what we get. For comparison, I'll do the same thing on Tomoe River. To start with, here's Birmingham Angelfish with the Regalia on the left and the Tomoe River on the right. And if I speed this up and let it dry, there's a bit of sheen on both of them, pretty similar amounts. So let's try another ink. This one is also from India. This is Krishna Moonview, the original. And when I let this dry, it looks like we get a pretty similar performance again. There's a little more sheen on the Regalia this time, but I'm assuming that's because of a difference in the amount of ink. So let's try this once more. This is KWZ Discovery Green. And this is odd. I think of this as a heavy sheening ink, but I don't get much sheen on either paper this time. But I think that from these swatches, it's clear that this Regalia paper sheens at least as well as the Tomoe River 52 GSM. We should look at how much sheen I get when I'm actually writing, though. I'm going to start with some Diamine Polar Glow, which sheens reliably but modestly. Here on Clairefontaine, there's a little bit of sheen, but not a lot. On this 68 GSM Tomoe River, there's a little bit more, but not as much as I expected. About the same amount on Cosmo Air Light, but it's shinier looking. And the Regalia looks about the same. Not a ton of sheen, but it is nice and shiny. Next, I've put some Birmingham Voltaic Arc in a 6th Avenue fountain pen with a broad nib, and this one is Clairefontaine paper, and you can see that there's not much sheen. Now, here's Tomoe River, and again, there's some, but it shows up more as color than anything shiny. On Cosmo Air Light, there's still not a ton of sheen, but the sheen that's there is nice and shiny. And this is the Regalia. As you can see, with this ink, the Regalia is very shiny, with most of the text covered in sheen. It looks to me as though Regalia promotes sheening as well as any other paper I've used. As long as I have these swatches in front of me, let's take a look at the back of these and see if they have bled through. Yes, it looks like on the Regalia, it did bleed through in the heaviest areas. Now, here's the back of the Tomoe River, and substantially more came through this time. Okay, now I'm moving on to shading. Let me begin by just taking a look at how it handles Sailor Manyo Ha Ha. It looks pretty good. We're getting the expected pinks and greens along with the blue. I've also done a couple of writing samples with some shading inks. Starting with the Sailor Seiboku, which is a pigment ink, this is how it looks on Regalia paper. This is Cosmo Air Snow, and this is Tomoe River. Let me see if I can show these side by side. I'd say that the Regalia paper is every bit as good as the Tomoe River here when it comes to shading. And one more. This is Rohrer and Klingner Alt Goldgrün on Regalia paper. Then this is Rhodia, Cosmo Air Snow, and Tomoe River. And again, the Regalia paper is just as good as any of the others, if not better. Okay, now the most difficult test that this paper will face. The feathering tests against my worst inks. My test inks here are Noodler's Monkey Hanger and Noodler's Brexit. These inks feather or bleed so badly that they're completely unusable on standard papers, and even on a lot of fountain pen friendly papers. First, just for comparison, this is some standard school notebook paper. Not fountain pen friendly, and as you can see, this ink just gushes off the dip pen and makes a mess of it. And the back side of the paper is just as bad. And it has also bled through to the next sheet, and there's even a bit on the third sheet. Actually, this is just too much of a mess. Let me switch to a glass pen that puts down a more reasonable amount of ink. Okay, that's better. The ink still feathers and spreads, but it's not so bad. Here's the same ink on Graphilo paper, which doesn't handle feathering inks well at all. Here's 52 GSM Tomoe River. No real feathering here, and the same thing is true with Cosmo Air Light. And finally, we get to the endless Regalia. I'm putting down ink a little heavier here, but it's handling it just fine. Okay, for something a bit more practical, I'm going to test these with a fountain pen too. These will all be written with a broad nib in a Diplomat Arrow. Here's Monkey Hanger on some standard 3-ring binder filler paper, and there's some spreading but less feathering than I expected, which I thought was impressive until I turned the paper over and found that it was just bleeding through instead of feathering. Here we have Rhodia paper, and the feathering is a little worse actually, but it doesn't bleed through as badly, though it does bleed through. On Tomoe River 68 GSM, there's almost no feathering, and when I turn the paper over, the bleed through is very minor, though it is visible, just a few pinpricks here and there. And this is the Regalia paper. It looks a lot like the Tomoe River here, hardly any feathering, just a little bit of spreading, and when I flip the paper over, there is no bleed through at all. That's impressive. So, have I found the perfect paper? Not quite, but close. This paper, being so similar to Cosmo Air Snow, might suffer from some of the same problems. First of all, this is a new paper, so there are some issues with availability. So far, I can only find it at the Endless Stationery website, and there, it's only available in the Endless Recorder A5 notebooks, in the Creative blocks, and in the Storyboard notebooks. I don't see it in any blank notebooks yet. It's all dot grid or ruled, and there's nothing loose leaf. So hopefully, those will be available in the future. These Endless Explorer notebooks, incidentally, look amazing. I hope that I can get my hands on one in the future. They're a little expensive, but the Regalia refills aren't that bad. The main problem that I have with Cosmo Air papers is that they pick up the oils from my hands so quickly, and then they won't take ink. So let's see how the Regalia papers compare. I will start by putting on some gloves, And I'm gonna just cut a few strips of paper for testing here. One of Tomoe River, one of Cosmo Air Snow, and one of Regalia. And I'll just draw a little circle here as a test patch. Now, with the gloves off, I'll plant my fingers inside the circles, 2 each. Now, this pen is an FPR Treveni with a nice wet nib, and I'm going to just scribble across this area and see if it has any trouble taking the ink. And with the Tomoe River, maybe a little bit, but no major problems. With the Cosmo Air Snow, though, there's definitely a problem. This is not taking ink well at all. And finally, here's the Regalia. And yes, this is also rejecting some ink, but it's not quite as bad as the Cosmo Air Snow. So where does that leave us? I'd say that this paper is now right up there with my all-time favorites. If I hadn't been told that this paper is something new and proprietary, I'd think that it's Cosmo Air Snow. It feels very similar and behaves just as well. That said, I really hope that Endless Stationery releases these notebooks with blank pages. And more importantly, I hope that they release softcover notebooks of the same size as the Endless Recorder in the proper A5 size. The Endless Explorer is beautiful, but it's not a standard size, and trying to make the millions of us with existing A5 leather covers switch to a proprietary Endless ecosystem would be a fool's errand. And that's it. I hope that all of you take a little time to enjoy your fountain pens and inks today, and stay safe out there. See you next time.